A moment of weakness that changed my life forever. There are moments in life that feel ordinary when they begin quiet. Unremarkable seconds that later split your world into before and after. For Emily Carter, that moment began on a cloudy Tuesday in early spring. She sat by the window of her small apartment in Seattle, watching the drizzle trace slow rivers down the glass. The city was wrapped in its usual gray, and the soft hum of traffic below sounded like a distant lullaby. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she didn't care. She wasn't really looking at the rain. She was lost in her own thoughts that had nowhere to go except the blank page of her computer screen. Emily was 32, a quiet woman with a gentle smile that hid how much she longed for something more. She worked as an assistant editor for a publishing house downtown, a job that kept her surrounded by other people's words but left her unsure of her own. Every day she helped writers polish their stories, fix their endings, give their characters hope. Yet when she looked at her own life, she often wondered if she'd forgotten how to write her own chapter. She wasn't unhappy, not exactly. She had a steady job, a few good friends, and a small, tidy apartment that smelled faintly of vanilla candles and books. But somewhere between her morning commute and late-night editing sessions, something inside her had gone quiet. She missed the feeling of being seen, being known by someone beyond her work. And then there was Daniel. Daniel Miller was the senior editor in her department. Thoughtful, calm, and effortlessly kind. He was the kind of person who remembered small things, like how she took her tea or when her birthday fell on a weekend. He had a laugh that filled the office, and a way of making everyone feel like their voice mattered. From the very first day she met him, Emily admired him. But admiration had a way of growing roots, quietly and unexpectedly. Over months, it deepened into something she couldn't quite name. Not love, not yet, but something close to it. A longing she kept carefully hidden, even from herself. It wasn't the kind of feeling she would ever act on. She respected him too much for that. Besides, Daniel had his own life, friends, plans, maybe even someone waiting for him outside the office walls. Whatever existed between them was silent, invisible. But it was real to her. That Tuesday afternoon, the office felt especially empty. Most of the team was out at a conference, leaving just her and Daniel behind to finish a few last-minute revisions. The rain outside blurred the skyline into silver streaks. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink as Emily typed. She could hear Daniel's faint humming from the other side of the room. It was a tune she didn't recognize. Low, peaceful, like the kind of song you hum without realizing you're doing it. And somehow, that quiet sound made the space between them feel smaller. Long day, huh? Daniel's voice broke the silence. She looked up, startled, then smiled softly. You could say that. I think my brain's running on caffeine and instinct at this point, he chuckled. Same here. Maybe we should call it a day soon. You've been staring at that manuscript since morning. Emily nodded, pretending to focus on the document in front of her, but her thoughts wandered every time he spoke to her. She felt something shift, a strange mixture of comfort and confusion. After he left that evening, she sat alone for a few more minutes, letting the hum of the empty office wrap around her. On her screen, the manuscript she'd been editing displayed the words, "Sometimes we don't choose the people who change us. They arrive quietly, and everything is different after." The line hit too close to home. She opened a blank email. Not because she planned to send it, but because she needed to release the thoughts crowding her heart. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began to type. Daniel, I know I'll probably never say this aloud, but you've made these long days brighter than you'll ever realize. Sometimes I wonder what my life would look like if I had your courage. I let myself feel without fear of what might happen next. She paused, staring at the blinking cursor. She wasn't writing a confession. She wasn't even sure what she was writing. Maybe it was just a letter to herself, a reminder that she was still capable of feeling something real outside. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. She smiled sadly, saved the draft, and closed her laptop. It was supposed to end there, a quiet moment, unseen and unheard. But life has a way of taking even the smallest choices and turning them into something bigger. something that changes everything. That night, as Emily lay in bed listening to the rain, her phone buzzed. A new email notification flashed on the screen. Her heart skipped a beat. Her breath caught when she saw the name Daniel Miller for a second. She froze, her mind racing through possibilities. Had she accidentally sent that letter? No, she told herself. That couldn't be. But deep down, strange unease began to grow. A sense that tomorrow would not be. It's just another ordinary day. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Emily lay awake, staring at the faint glow of city lights through her curtains. The sound of rain on the window was steady, almost comforting. But her thoughts refused to rest. That name on her phone, Daniel Miller. It lingered in her mind like an unfinished sentence. She wanted to check the message, but part of her was too afraid. What if she had really sent the letter? What if he had read every word? When morning finally came, she found the courage to look. The message wasn't about her email at all, just a short note reminding her about an early meeting with a client. Relief washed over her, but so did something else. A strange ache, a quiet wish that maybe, just once, something between them had been seen. As she walked to work, the clouds were lifting, and sunlight spilled through the trees in golden stripes. The city felt softer somehow, as if the world was giving her space to remember. Emily had known Daniel for almost 3 years. When she first joined the publishing company, she'd been nervous, fresh from a smaller firm that had closed unexpectedly. On her first day, she'd spilled her coffee before she even reached her desk. Everyone else had laughed politely, but Daniel had simply handed her a napkin and said, "Rough starts usually lead to good stories." That one sentence had stayed with her. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, gently, without judgment. From that day on, she noticed the little ways he made people feel at ease, how he listened more than he spoke, how he remembered details most would forget. He wasn't the loudest person in the room, but somehow his presence always steadied it. Over time, their conversations became part of her daily rhythm. They talked about books and writers, about the art of telling stories that mattered. Sometimes they shared small pieces of their lives, nothing too personal, just fragments that hinted at something deeper. She learned that Daniel had grown up in Portland, loved old movies, and used to help his father repair bicycles as a kid. He'd once dreamed of becoming a teacher before life led him to publishing. He learned that Emily collected postcards from every place she visited, even if it was just a nearby town. She said they helped her remember that stories existed everywhere, even in the smallest corners of the world. Those moments built something between them. Not romance exactly, but connection. A kind of quiet friendship that made ordinary days feel meaningful. But what she remembered most was the winter retreat. 2 years ago, a weekend conference for their publishing team at a cabin near the coast. The first night had been cold, and the power went out after a storm rolled through. While others grumbled, Daniel had started a small fire in the stone fireplace. He'd handed out blankets, brewed coffee on a camping stove, and somehow made the whole ordeal feel like an adventure. Later, when most of the team had gone to bed, Emily had stayed awake. Sitting by the fire's fading glow, Daniel joined her, wrapped in his own blanket. And for a while, neither of them spoke. Then he'd said quietly, I think this is my favorite kind of silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled." She remembered how those words felt, calm, steady, like a soft promise. It was the first time she realized she could trust him. Not in a dramatic way, but in the way you trust someone who truly sees you. That night, we talked about everything and nothing. Childhood dreams, first jobs, the fear of failing at something you love. She remembered thinking how easy it was to be herself around him, how rare that felt. When they said goodnight, he'd smiled and said, "Get some rest, Emily. Tomorrow's another chapter." And it was. But it was also the beginning of something she couldn't quite define. Since then, life had gone on, as it always does. There were busy seasons, new authors to edit, endless deadlines. But through it all, that quiet thread between them never really faded. Sometimes he'd bring her coffee without asking. It's just the way she liked it. Extra milk, no sugar. Sometimes he'd leave small notes on her desk with lines from books they both loved. You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. One had read a quote from Rumi. She'd kept that one tucked safely into her notebook. Still, there were boundaries. Daniel was her senior, her mentor in many ways. And though they shared trust, neither crossed the unspoken line between friendship and something more. Maybe it was timing. Maybe fear. Maybe the quiet understanding that some feelings were better kept folded inside. As Emily arrived at the office that morning, Daniel was already there, leaning over a stack of printed pages. He looked up when she entered, offering his usual. Emily's days had fallen into a quiet rhythm since that rainy Tuesday. The office was busy. The city moved at its usual hurried pace, and yet she couldn't shake the lingering thoughts of Daniel. Not about him in a romantic or dramatic way, but about the unspoken connection they shared, a bond built over years of laughter, shared deadlines, and fleeting moments of quiet understanding. That Wednesday morning began like any other. Emily arrived at the office, umbrella dripping, coffee in hand, and a sense of the usual routine settling around her. She didn't expect anything out of the ordinary. That was the pattern she had learned to rely on. But fate has its own gentle way of breaking routines. As she rounded the corner to the conference room, she nearly collided with Daniel. He was carrying a stack of manuscripts and a tablet, his focus entirely on balancing the precarious load. The suddenness of the moment made her gasp, and he looked up, startled. "Emily." "Sorry, I wasn't watching," he said, a hint of genuine concern in his voice. "No, it's okay," she replied, steadying herself. Their eyes met, and for a second, the mundane office around them disappeared. There was a flicker of something familiar, something they both recognized but had never spoken aloud. They both laughed lightly, and the tension broke. But as they straightened, Daniel handed her a notebook he had noticed she left on the printer the day before. "You forgot this," he said. Emily took it, fingers brushing his briefly. Something about that simple gesture, the casual touch, the acknowledgement of each other, made her heart feel heavier and lighter at the same time. She wondered why something so ordinary could stir feelings she had carefully set aside. Later that day, the office announced an impromptu meeting in the lounge, a small team brainstorming session. Emily hesitated, but Daniel gestured for her to join him. Sitting across from him, she felt the subtle warmth of familiarity, the way their shoulders almost touched without intention. The discussion itself was ordinary: book releases, client feedback, and new project ideas. But amid the chatter, Emily caught herself noticing the details she had missed before. The way Daniel's hair fell slightly over his forehead when he was concentrating. The gentleness of his hand movements when he gestured. The steady rhythm of his voice that somehow made her feel calm. And then, as if fate had timed it perfectly, a small mishap occurred. One of the interns spilled a cup of coffee, sending papers fluttering to the floor. Emily instinctively reached to help, but so did Daniel. Their hands met over the scattered documents, brushing lightly as they gathered the pages. Emily felt a sudden rush, not of anything inappropriate, but of recognition. That fleeting contact reminded her of the winter cabin retreat, quiet moments shared by firelight, of words exchanged when no one else was listening. It was as if time had folded back on itself, and for a brief instant, they were the same two people who had shared laughter stories. An unspoken trust years ago when their hands finally separated. They both lingered slightly, exchanging a glance that spoke more than words could convey. Emily's chest tightened, a mix of excitement and nervousness. Daniel smiled softly, and for a moment, the world outside the lounge, the deadlines, the emails, the noise of the city seemed to vanish after the meeting. Emily returned to her desk, trying to focus on the tasks at hand. But the moment lingered. Her thoughts drifted back to that email she had drafted months ago, the one she had never sent. A wave of what if washed over her. What if she had been braver? What if she had dared to speak her heart back then? It wasn't regret exactly, not the bitter kind, but a quiet awareness of how fragile moments can be, how easily feelings can be left unspoken. Her reflection was interrupted when Daniel appeared at her desk. holding a printed article she had mentioned in passing earlier that week. "I thought you'd like to see this," he said, offering it with a small, tentative smile. Emily accepted it, fingers brushing his again. She noticed how natural it felt, not shocking or startling, just right. And as she looked up at him, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to admit. She had missed this, the quiet companionship, the shared glances, the feeling that someone truly saw her. Daniel lingered, pretending to review the papers on her desk, but the subtle warmth in his eyes betrayed his own awareness of the moment. Neither of them spoke, yet in the silence, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that their connection had never truly faded. That evening, as Emily walked home, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. She thought about how life had a way of nudging people together, sometimes through coincidence, sometimes through small, seemingly insignificant events. The coffee spill, the shared notebook, the gentle smile across the room, each tiny spark reminded her that feelings, once planted, never completely die. They wait, quietly, patiently, and sometimes, just when you least expect it. They remind you of what you almost lost and what could still be waiting. Emily realized that day that the past was not gone. It was alive, resting in the spaces between their shared moments, waiting for the right moment to be noticed again. And something inside her told her that moment might be closer than she had ever imagined. The week after the coffee spill and the shared notebook passed quietly. But Emily felt a subtle shift in the air between her and Daniel. It wasn't loud, dramatic, or obvious. It was in the pauses, the glances, the gentle ways they seemed to notice each other more than anyone else. She caught herself lingering over emails a little longer, just to see if he might respond with a line that felt personal. She noticed how he sometimes stayed at his desk a few minutes later than necessary, seemingly waiting for the right moment to speak, yet never quite daring to. And Daniel had his own quiet hesitation. Emily knew him well enough to recognize it. The way his hand would hover over the papers he was holding before he set them down. The way he glanced up at her with eyes that seemed to ask a question. He didn't dare speak aloud. They were both caught in the same delicate tension, a desire to bridge the gap that had always existed between friendship and something deeper, but also a fear of disrupting the fragile balance they had carefully maintained. That Thursday afternoon, the office felt unusually still. Rain had returned, tapping gently against the windows. Emily sat with her back to the soft gray light, typing slowly, though her mind wandered constantly toward Daniel. He approached her desk quietly, a stack of manuscripts in his arms. "Emily," he said softly, not looking at her directly, "do you have a moment?" She turned, offering a smile that was steady despite the flutter in her chest. "Of course." He set the manuscripts down and hesitated, his fingers brushing against the edge of the desk. I wanted to ask something," he began, his voice careful, measured. "About that project last month, the edits you suggested. You really had the right perspective. He trailed off. Emily waited, sensing that the sentence wasn't about manuscripts at all. "Daniel?" she prompted gently. He exhaled, a small, almost imperceptible sound, like he had been holding it in for longer than she could guess. I've been meaning to say thank you. Not just for the project, but for being someone I can really rely on. You've been important." Emily's heart thudded, caught between surprise and the warmth of recognition. She wanted to respond with something equally honest, but the right words seemed impossible. Instead, she offered a soft smile. "You've been important to me too," she said quietly. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of unspoken truths filling the space between them. Neither needed to define it yet. The acknowledgement alone that they had mattered to each other beyond casual friendship was enough. That night, Emily replayed the conversation in her mind. She remembered the shy way he had avoided eye contact at first, the hesitation in his voice, and the careful way he had chosen each word. She realized that Daniel's restraint wasn't indifference. It was fear, just like hers. Fear of crossing lines that might change everything, and yet the longing was there, clear, undeniable, and quietly persistent. She thought back to their years of shared moments, the long walks to meetings, the laughter over spilled coffee, the silent exchanges over manuscripts. Each memory was a thread weaving a tapestry of trust and affection, subtle yet strong. It struck her that love, the kind that grows slowly, quietly, isn't always dramatic or loud. Sometimes it is whispered in small gestures, hidden in glances, and carried in words that are almost never spoken. The next morning, Emily arrived at work early, hoping for a moment of ordinary connection. She found Daniel already at his desk, his eyes focused on a screen, but his presence filling the room in a way that felt almost comforting. She approached quietly. "Morning," she said. He looked up, returning her greeting with a faint smile. "Morning, Emily." For a few minutes, they worked in companionable silence. The quiet was heavy with meaning, the kind of silence that carries emotion when words feel inadequate. Then, Daniel glanced toward her and hesitated. "I've been thinking," he admitted softly, "about how things used to be, and how much I've appreciated having you around. More than I probably ever said." Emily's chest tightened. She wanted to tell him the truth, that she had felt the same, that some of her quietest, most honest thoughts were about him, but she stayed still, letting the moment linger. Words weren't necessary yet. The AC. It was late afternoon when the office finally emptied, leaving Emily alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of city traffic. She was typing the last few lines of a manuscript she had been polishing all week, her mind only half on the words in front of her. The other half was somewhere else, with Daniel. She didn't know when the feeling had become impossible to ignore. The quiet moments, the shared smiles, the subtle gestures that had always been there between them, they had grown louder in her heart. And now, with the office nearly empty, every memory of their past closeness pressed against her like a weight she could no longer ignore. Daniel appeared quietly at the doorway, holding a stack of papers and a soft expression she hadn't seen before. "Emily," he said gently, his voice almost hesitant, "are you staying late tonight?" "Yes," she admitted softly, closing her laptop. "Just finishing up a few things." He nodded, then lingered. There was a tension in the air that made her heart race. She knew that look, the one that meant something important, was about to be said. I was hoping we could talk," he continued, stepping closer. "Not about work." Emily's breath caught. She looked at him, searching his face for any hint of what he might say. "I've been holding back for too long," he confessed, voice steady but quiet, as if he were afraid to break the fragile spell of the moment. "I don't know why I didn't say anything sooner, but I need you to know something. I've felt more than friendship for a long time. I've been afraid of risking what we have, afraid of changing things between us. But I can't keep it to myself any longer." Emily felt a rush of emotions so intense it nearly knocked the words from her lips. Her chest tightened, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to process the confession. "Daniel," she began, her voice soft, almost a whisper. He held her gaze, giving her the space to speak, to respond, to reveal her own truth. She remembered all the moments they had shared, the walks to meetings, the laughter over small mistakes, the late-night conversations in the cabin, the quiet glances that carried so much meaning. "I felt the same," she admitted, her voice stronger now, her eyes shining. "I just didn't know how to say it. I didn't want to risk losing you, even as a friend. But I can't pretend anymore. I care about you, Daniel, more than I've allowed myself to admit." The silence that followed was electric, filled with the weight of all the years they had spent side by side, all the words unspoken, all the feelings carefully hidden. Daniel stepped closer, a gentle smile softening his features. "I was worried I'd ruin things by feeling this way," he said quietly. "But hearing you say that, it's like a weight I've been carrying is finally lifted." Emily smiled, a mixture of relief and joy. She realized that the years of hesitation, the careful steps around boundaries, had been worth it. The truth had waited patiently for the right moment, and now it was here. They stood together, neither needing to rush, neither needing to force a grand gesture. The moment itself was enough, two hearts finally acknowledging what had always been there. Hidden in the small actions, in the quiet understanding, in the patience and care they had shown each other all along. I think, Emily began, her voice soft but steady, that the moments we've shared, even when we didn't speak, were preparing us for this. For a chance to finally be honest with ourselves. And with each other. Tino nodded. I believe that too, he replied. It's funny. I never realized how much the quiet moments mattered until I almost lost the chance to speak. Oh. They shared a small laugh, light and genuine, the kind that comes from relief and recognition. It wasn't dramatic or forced. It was real, intimate, in the simplest, most honest way possible. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden glow through the office windows. It felt as though the world had paused for them, giving space for truth and courage to fill the room. Emily thought about all the things she had feared: awkwardness, rejection, change, and realized none of it mattered now. What mattered was honesty, the courage to speak, and the willingness to let the bond they had built finally bloom into something more. I'm glad we waited, Daniel said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. I think we needed to understand ourselves first, and each other. Yes, Emily agreed. And I think this is just the beginning. They left the office together, side by side, feeling lighter, braver, and more connected than they ever had before. The city stretched out around them, familiar yet transformed, as if reflecting the quiet, profound change between two people who had finally spoken their hearts. For Emily and Daniel, the unspoken truths of the past had finally found their voice. And in that honest, gentle confession, they discovered something far more beautiful than they had ever dared to imagine. A love grounded in trust, respect, and the quiet intimacy of hearts that had always been aligned. The following weeks passed quietly, but they were filled with a new sense of closeness that Emily and Daniel had never experienced before. Their relationship didn't change overnight. There were no sudden grand gestures or dramatic confessions beyond what had already been shared. Instead, it grew naturally, gently, like a story unfolding one page at a time. At the office, their teamwork remained seamless. They still shared the usual banter over manuscripts, discussed edits, and helped each other meet deadlines. But beneath the ordinary routines, there was now a subtle warmth, a shared understanding that neither needed to explain. Every glance, every smile, carried a quiet acknowledgement of the truth. They had finally spoken aloud. Emily noticed it most in the small moments. The way Daniel would pause to ask her opinion on something trivial. The way he left a mug of her favorite tea on her desk. The way he remembered little details she had mentioned weeks ago. Each gesture felt intentional, not in a showy way, but in a way that spoke of care, thoughtfulness, and respect. Daniel, too, seemed to walk a little taller, his usually calm presence softened by a gentle joy. He no longer hid his appreciation, nor did he pretend the unspoken bond of the past didn't exist. Instead, he embraced it quietly, letting Emily know, through subtle actions and shared moments, that she mattered deeply to him. One Friday afternoon, the office held a small celebration for a recently published book. Emily and Daniel were among the last to leave, their colleagues already scattered across the city streets. Outside, the air was crisp and golden with the early autumn sunlight. "Shall we walk?" Daniel asked, offering his arm in a gesture that was simple yet intimate in its sincerity. Emily smiled, taking it. They walked together, side by side, letting the rhythm of their steps match the rhythm of their thoughts. Neither of them rushed to speak. The comfort of silence, once so familiar, had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer lonely. It was shared. "I've been thinking about something," Emily said after a moment, her voice soft, careful. "About all those years we spent side by side without really saying what we felt." Daniel glanced at her, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I know," he said, "and I don't regret it. I think it made us stronger, more certain. It taught us to notice the little things, to appreciate what we already had before taking the next step." Emily nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I think I finally understand that love isn't always about rushing. Sometimes it's about patience, trust, and knowing when the moment is right." "Exactly," Daniel said, his voice quiet but sure. "And I think we found that moment." The walk continued through the streets of Seattle, past familiar cafes and bookstores, past the gentle bustle of the city. Emily thought about how ordinary life had always been, yet how extraordinary it felt now. The bond they had built, years of shared glances, quiet support, and mutual respect had grown into something rare, something meaningful. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. There were no grand declarations, no elaborate gestures. Just a deep, steady understanding and an unspoken promise that they would face the future together. Side by side, by the time they reached the small park near her apartment, the sunlight had softened into a warm, golden glow. They stopped near a bench, watching the leaves drift slowly from the trees. Emily realized that this was what she had been longing for all along. Not perfection, not fantasy, but a connection that felt real, lasting. And safe. Daniel turned to her, his expression calm yet filled with a gentle intensity. "I'm glad we didn't rush," he said. "I'm glad we waited until we were ready to be honest and to truly appreciate each other." Emily smiled, reaching for his hand. "Me too," she replied, "because now it feels right, and it feels like home." For a while, they simply sat there, hands intertwined, letting the quiet of the park fill them with a sense of peace. The world continued to move around them, but inside that small space, time felt suspended. Later, as Emily entered her apartment, she reflected on how far she had come. She thought about the rainy Tuesday when she had drafted a letter she never sent. The winter cabin retreat, the small moments of coffee and shared laughter, all the pieces that had led to this. Every hesitation, every unspoken word, had been a part of the journey, and she realized that life didn't need to be perfect to be meaningful. Sometimes it was the quiet moments, the patience, the courage to be honest that mattered most. She glanced at her phone, where Daniel had sent a simple message. "See you tomorrow. Can't wait to share another ordinary, perfect day with you." Emily smiled soft,